So I'd like to speak to you now about science in African American communities, and it's connected with the conversation I just had with Valerie June, while it's also focused on a new film I'm doing entitled My Mom, the Scientist, and a parallel national community engagement project called Scientists in the Family. And like the presentation before, I'll start with a family photograph. This is me and my mom, and I'm holding the camera that was given to me by my grandfather. I come from a family that placed emphasis on recording our community because we knew mainstream news and media was not. The family album contains a wealth of vernacular history, or citizen journalism if we take time to really look at it. But here's a narrative within our family album that was glaringly absent. Images of my mother at work in the role of a scientist and science educator in the 1970s and 80s. My mom was a chemistry professor at Bronx Community College, an early STEM education advocate, and a global activist for human rights. These photographs of her remained largely buried in the institutional archives of the Bronx Community College and were completely hidden from our family album. I began to ask myself, what is the relationship between hidden figures within our families and communities and science, miseducation, and mistrust? My Mom, the Scientist, examines a seldom-told story of the challenges and untapped potential around African American participation in STEM. And if we could cue up the trailer. Here's a short trailer for the film, My Mom, the Scientist. I have a confession to make. My name is Thomas Allen Harris. I'm a filmmaker, but also I'm a nerd. But I'm not the only one. Although science has always been important in my life, in popular culture, scientists are often the butt of many jokes.
So I took my cool gene and I doubled it. I doubled it again and again until I had 100 trillion cool genes.
I'm a nerd, and my mom is totally to blame.
Interview with Rudean. Take one.
People used to always say I should be a lawyer because I always had an answer for everything.
My mom is a scientist.
I liked chemistry. I loved it. I could express myself through chemistry, through my problem-solving skills, using my intelligence. When I graduated college, I was looking for a job in a pharmaceutical. But then people were saying, well, you know, I don't know, they're hiring blacks in the pharmaceutical industry. They're very prejudiced.
My mother, Rudean, is the antithesis of popular notions about scientists.
When I think of a scientist, I think of them more like conventional, like white lab coat in the basement, very isolated, researching like something, you know.
Only 18% of all students graduate with a STEM degree, according to the National Center for Education Statistics. Around 2% are black.
I wanted to find out why there are so few African Americans pursuing science today. Even though I left science to become a filmmaker, my love of science was a connection to my mom, although I took it for granted.
There was a job opening at Bronx Community College. So I went up there and interviewed and they offered me a job. So one of the guys, one day were interviewing me, the guy says, you're not going to, because I had an afro at that time, you're not going to take any days off to demonstrate, are you? I came out of left field. I said, no, I'll just demonstrate when I'm not teaching. But he did give me the job anyway.
This was at the height of Black Power.
60,
right?
60.
Right
I
after.
started Bronx 67, so it was 67.
I was inspired to follow in her footsteps. So the film places the story of my mom and other black scientists in the context of media representations of science, scientists, and science communication. We also interview science journalists who cover black and BIPOC communities, like scientists, and in addition, scientists such as Shirley Malcolm, who was at the American Association for the Advancement of Science. And when I interviewed her 30 years ago for a film, I had no idea that her husband was also a scientist. He's a physicist, and both her daughters are science communicators. For the last 30 years, I have been making personal films that mine my family and extended family albums to illuminate and examine larger social movements, such as the anti-apartheid movement. And the person on the third from left is my stepdad, who raised me and who left with these other gentlemen to go into exile in 1960 after the ANC was banned. Little did they know they would be in exile for 30 years. And after his death, I returned to South Africa, or I went to South Africa with his photo album and encouraged young South African actors to recreate the narratives in these images and stories by connecting them with the still living colleagues of my dad. And Through a Lens Darkly is a film that looks at the image of African Americans within the mythic American Family album through the lens also of black photographers. So I've been making films for almost 30 years, and even though even though I have many film colleagues, most don't know that I started out in science. And my first few films were focused on STEM. And can we have the next slide? Including my first film, Crisis: Who Will Do Science, produced in 1989, which explores the reasons behind the dearth of African Americans pursuing careers in science. My Mom, the Scientist, picks up where Crisis left off. Why, after billions of dollars spent to increase representation in STEM, are we still at a place where there are so few African Americans pursuing science? And you can tell from this graph, African Americans receiving doctorates is at the bottom, and also marginally increases in 2018. And if you were to look at African Americans getting doctorates in science and STEM fields, it would even be much, much lower. I thought it was time for me to re-examine the subject, a decision that became particularly clear at the onslaught of COVID, with its disproportionate adverse impacts on the black community, highlighting not only science skepticism, but more perniciously, increased science misinformation and its impact on democracy. This film aims to answer the question, why, after decades of investment in education initiatives to increase black representation in STEM, do we find ourselves with so few African American scientists? The film will include voices of black scientists, educators, healthcare workers, former students of Mom and her colleagues, journalists, advocates who have worked for years to increase BIPOC representation in STEM, and who also link these low numbers to science misinformation and mistrust. Through the story of Mom and her National Institute of Health-funded Minority Biomedical Research Program around lead levels in zoo animals, the film will look at community colleges, which together with historically black colleges and universities play an outsized role in college access, particularly with regard to STEM graduates of color, and yet are under-resourced. I don't know how many people are aware of this, but 1/3 of people matriculating through college actually attend a community college, and yet they're severely under-resourced. In addition to a theatrical release, the film will be broadcast on PBS with a major companion experiential engagement project, Scientists in the Family, which invites multi-generational black families to explore their connections with STEM through live events, an online series to be broadcast in PBS Digital. And I did also want to mention that while it's targeting African American communities, it's open to all communities in a way that's similar to our Family Pictures Institute projects. My Mom, the Scientist, and Scientists in the Family will work to continue my previous work using family and community albums to illuminate larger social movements and issues. This is a form of community engagement that increases connection and decreases isolation. The archive that we are building will also serve as a resource to broadcast and print journalists seeking untold family narratives around science and STEM within the context of community. My Mom, the Scientist is more than just a film. It's a movement to engage multi-generational families in STEM and inspire the next generation of scientists, like Destiny Wright, who I met at Penn State, who's now working at the NIH and taking a break before she continues with her PhD in neurochemistry. She comes from a family that has schizophrenia in it, and that's one of the things that motivates her to pursue STEM. My mom is currently, just turned 86, and she's not lost anything, using that scientific curiosity to navigate aging, community response to COVID, diet, Medicaid, and HIV education in her church. And here she is in conversation this past summer with two Native American scientists, Carol Van Dow, who is a Wampanoag scientist and a science educator, and Robin Wall Kilmer, the author of Braiding Sweetgrass. And they were discussing chemistry, water, and the environment on Martha's Vineyard. With the support of many institutions over the past few years, the film is poised to make significant impact. We expect it to come out next summer, assuming we're able to raise additional funds to complete our budget for the film and to launch a 10-city tour celebrating scientists and science within our families and communities. And I'll end with a quote from Mom. I can't mimic her voice, but I'll try. I always felt that there should be more African Americans in the sciences. It's very important for the community. It's important that young people see their role models there. Science has a very large impact on our lives, our health, and on our technology. So we need to be in the game. Thank you so much.